We've all looked at a world map. It's got that familiar patchwork of countries and borders we've seen a million times. But have you ever really stopped to ask why the lines are drawn where they are? Because it's definitely not random. In fact, that whole map is basically a battleground between two incredibly powerful, invisible forces. See, that map you know so well is really the result of centuries of push and pull, a constant negotiation. These borders we see, they're the visible scars and triumphs of an invisible global game. So the real question is, what are the rules of that game? Well, it really all boils down to two fundamental drivers. On one side, you've got the top-down force of control. That's the strategic push by states for power and resources. And on the other side, you have this bottom-up force of belonging, that deep human connection we have to land and culture. And this entire explainer, it's all about that constant tug of war. All right, so let's dive into that first force, control, or as geographers call it, political power. This is all about this strategic, almost calculated way that states exert their will on the world stage. So what is political power, really? It's basically a country's ability to get things done, both inside its own borders and out in the world. It's about managing your people, locking down resources, and making sure your voice is heard when big global decisions are being made. But where does this power actually leave its fingerprints on the map? Well, geographers have pointed out three key ways that raw political power physically shapes our world. So we're going to break down these three concepts: shatterbelts, choke points, and neocolonialism. Okay, first up, shatterbelt. Just imagine a region that's literally caught in a geopolitical tug-of-war between two or more giant, competing countries. That region, which is often filled with all sorts of diverse and rival groups, becomes incredibly unstable and fragmented. That's what we call a shatterbelt. And believe me, this isn't just theory. The danger here is very real. Take the Balkans, for example. The tangled web of alliances in that volatile shatterbelt between European empires is what directly sparked World War I. And for decades, Eastern Europe was the primary shatterbelt between the US and the Soviet Union, a zone of constant, simmering tension. All right, let's move on to our next expression of power, choke points. And these are, well, they're pretty much exactly what they sound like. They're narrow geographic bottlenecks, things like canals or straits, that control the flow of global trade and military ships. If you control a choke point, you have an insane amount of leverage. Now, what's so wild here is how a tiny little strip of water can basically hold the entire world economy hostage. The Strait of Hormuz, which is controlled by Iran, is the main artery for a huge chunk of the world's oil. And the Suez Canal in Egypt, it literally connects Europe and Asia. When it was nationalized back in 1956, it even led to an invasion. If you control these points, you effectively hold a valve on the global flow of money and power. Okay, and finally, there's a much more subtle form of control: neocolonialism. The old age of empires, of planting flags and conquering territory, that might be over. But the influence? Oh, that's not gone. Today, power is often exerted through economic and cultural pressure. It's kind of like colonialism without the colonizers. So how does this work? It often creates this cycle of dependency. See, back in the colonial era, European powers intentionally redesigned local economies to serve their own interests. They pushed them to focus on exporting cheap stuff like cocoa or palm oil. So even after these countries gained independence, those economic structures were still in place, leaving many of them stuck depending on the economies of their former rulers. And, the source material uses this really powerful phrase that these economies were maligned. It suggests they were intentionally twisted, warped into something that wasn't for their own good, but for the benefit of their colonial parents. And that really hits home, just how lasting and damaging this form of control can be. Okay, so we've talked about control. Now let's flip the coin and talk about the other side of this tug of war. If political power is the top-down force, then territoriality is the bottom-up force of human belonging. This one is all about identity. So what is territoriality? It's that really fundamental human gut feeling of connection to a place. It's that moment when a piece of land becomes way more than just dirt and rocks. It becomes part of who you are. It's your culture, your history, your way of life. It's that deep feeling of, this is our land. And we make this feeling visible everywhere, right? Every time you see a border fence, a big wall, or even just the unique way a village is laid out, you're seeing an expression of territoriality. It's also there when a community says, hey, these are our fishing grounds, or these minerals belong to us, tying their whole economy to their land. But here's the thing, this super deep connection, it can have a really dark side. When a piece of land gets so tied up in a group's identity, the desire to control it, to draw lines in the sand and keep others out, can become incredibly powerful, and it can often lead straight to conflict and war. So, the source material actually points to the case of Russia and Ukraine as a modern example of this. After Ukraine became an independent nation in 1991, Russian leadership continued to express a very deep sense of territoriality, a belief that Ukraine culturally and historically just belongs to Russia. This feeling, this force of belonging, is cited as a driver behind the conflicts aimed at reasserting control over Ukrainian territory. Okay, so let's bring it all together. We have these two massive forces, the strategic, top-down push for control, and the emotional, bottom-up pull of belonging. And the world map? That's the canvas where this constant battle plays out, day after day. So when you really boil it all down, you've got these two very different forces. Political power is played like a giant game of global chess. It's all about control, and it's expressed through strategic things like shatter belts and choke points. But territoriality, that's all about the heart. It's focused on identity and a deep connection to the land, and we see it expressed in borders, in how people use the land, and in these powerful claims of belonging. And that really leaves us with one last, huge question. As our world keeps changing, with climate change shifting resources, populations moving, new powers rising, which force do you think will draw the next set of borders? Will it be the cold, hard logic of strategic power, or will it be the deep, passionate fire of human identity? The answer to that is going to define the world we leave behind.